So if you've never drafted Magic the Gathering before and want to learn how, or you have but want to get better, stick around. We'll be covering a variety of topics today, such as what to think about during the various stages of a draft, when to use tier lists, what a mana curve is, and much, much more. Before we dive in, let's lay out what our goal is, or what we're aiming to accomplish by the end of the draft. Our main goal is to find the two-color pair that is open, or underdrafted at the table. Some red cards and some blue cards, for example. A color being open means that the people around us are not interested in those colors. You'll continue to get past cards in that color, and your deck will likely be very good. However, if you're fighting with multiple other players for that color, you're not going to see good cards, and you'll struggle to win. Now, there's obviously a lot more to it than that, but we'll get to those topics as they become relevant. Our first decision that we have to make is our pack one, pick one. Keeping our goal in mind of finding the open colors, pack one, pick one is actually pretty irrelevant to that, and really what we want to do is just pick the best card in the pack. As simple as that. Now, where it's easy to get tripped up here is thinking that the best card in the pack is simply the rare or the big giant 6-mana creature. Many times, the best card in the pack may end up being a common removal spell or a good 2-mana creature. But how can we know that with little to no experience with the set? Now, when you open a certified bomb, it's usually pretty easy to tell, and you should just pick that card. So for example, in Kamigawa, all of these monocolored sagas with cheap casting costs and insane abilities, these are all pretty obvious first pick bombs. Keeping in mind our goal of pack one, pick one, which is to just pick the best card, this is a great time for tier lists. Simply a list of cards in the set ranked from best to worst, generally with a number or letter grade attached. Normally, I find them pretty distracting. They don't really take into account a lot of the context of a draft. Cards change in value as you have more cards in your deck. However, pack one, pick one, context is irrelevant. So a tier list can help us identify what the best cards in the pack are. So now let's get into our pack here. This pack is a good example of a not so obvious first pick. The rare here seems powerful, but it's actually quite narrow and very difficult to cast. On the other hand, this uncommon removal spell, Assassin's Ink, is quite strong and will end up in pretty much every black deck we play. I'm going to take the Spirited Companion, though, for the same reason. It will end up in every white deck and is one of the best commons in the set, but I do like white a little bit more than black in Kamigawa. So the next stage in a draft is picks 2 through 4. Now that we've got our first pick out of the way, we are going to take the same strategy with the next few picks as well. We just simply want to take the best card out of the pack and try not to weight too heavily that we've already taken a white card. Just because we first picked a white card does not mean we should end up in white by the end of the draft, because the next 44 picks of the draft are more important than the one you already did. So for our draft, I'm going to end up taking the Modern Age, Heiko Yamazaki, and Sunblade Samurai. I'm hedging towards white just a bit. So picks 5 through 8. Here's where we really want to start reading signals, but also solidifying our first color. So what is a signal? A signal is a piece of information we receive from another drafter about what colors they are not interested in. Almost always this will come in the form of a powerful card late in a pack. If we're able to correctly identify the colors the players around us are not interested in, they will continue to pass us those colors throughout the rest of pack 1 and in pack 3 when those same drafters pass to us again. So this pack is actually a pretty good example. Voltage Surge is a fairly high pick, and the fact that it's still in the pack at pick 5 gives me a data point that red is open. If Voltage Surge was packed to me 3rd pick, let's say, that's not really a signal yet because the drafters to my right could have taken other strong rares or uncommons over it. So a common pitfall to look out for here is thinking that a lot of cards in a single color within a pack means that that color is open. Especially here. These 3 green cards are very mediocre, so seeing these 3 cards in a pack might seem like a green signal, but it's probably not because these are not cards that someone would be interested in this early in the draft. So we're going to take Voltage Surge and hopefully get paid off with more red cards down the line. So another common mistake here that's worth mentioning is thinking that you should try to get into the best color or avoid getting into the worst color. Of course, there are exceptions to everything, and there are sets where certain colors are much better than others, but generally speaking, even if you're in the worst color, but it was open, you're going to beat players that force their way into the quote best color. And although we want to try to be open to signals throughout pack 1, we do want to attempt to solidify our first color. So pick 9, or the wheel, is very important because it's the first time the pack has gone all the way around the table. This is really the first time we get a true clean signal about what the other drafters do not want. And wrapping up the rest of pack 1, we also want to start considering the following. What is our deck's game plan? Is our deck going to be aggressive, or is our deck going to be a little bit slower? Both of those decks need very different things, and it's important to start to consider that. Now, this is hard to know without practice, but looking through the set list and trying to figure out what each 2-color pair is trying to do can be really helpful. Keep an eye out for the signpost uncommons. These are uncommons in each 2-color pair, that give you a huge hint for how to win with those colors. For example, in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, the red-green uncommon tells us the red-green deck is likely aggressive and cares about us modifying creatures. We can then deduce that we're looking for cheap, aggressive creatures and combat tricks to push through damage if we end up in that deck. Decks that really lean into these strategies and build synergies will be much more successful than those that don't. Another resource I like to use here is 17lands.com. You can browse through the recent trophy decks from other 17 Lands users. These are decks that reach the 7-win goal. In other words, very good decks. This way you really know what you're looking for to round out your deck. So to recap, in Pack 1, we're looking to pick the best cards we can, picks 1 through 4, and not committing to any color too hard. Picks 5 through 8, we want to start reading signals and identifying what colors seem to be open. Pick 9 is the wheel, where we can potentially receive a very strong signal. And for the rest of Pack 1, we want to try to get deep into one main color, or perhaps 2 colors if the signals are strong for a particular archetype. Now let's breeze through the rest of this pack as we try and solidify ourselves in white going into Pack 2. By early Pack 2, we really want to try and solidify what our 2-color pair is. If we wait too long to commit, we might end up short on playables and maybe playing some cards we don't really want to play that don't fit our game plan, or having to play a 3rd color, which definitely is not ideal in most sets. This also seems like a good time to touch on creature count. Almost all limited decks win through combat, in other words, attacking with creatures, and it's important that we have a critical mass of creatures so we always have one when we need one. There's also other card types that rely on having creatures in play for them to work at all, like equipment and combat tricks, for example. A good rule of thumb is 15 to 17 creatures in a limited deck. The next question we can start to ask throughout Pack 2 is, what is our mana curve? So one of the most important concepts to deck building in Magic, especially limited, is your mana curve. We want to make sure that we have stuff to do every turn of the game and try our best to spend all of our mana every turn if we can. So let's break this down further. Here's what we're looking for roughly for our creatures. 5 to 7 2-drops, 4 to 6 3-drops, 3 to 4 4-drops, 1 or 2 5-drops, and 1 or 2 6-drops and above. 1-drops can also be good, such as the Generous Visitor and the Reinforced Ronin if they're in the right decks. Limited sets these days can be fast and punishing if you're not playing a creature on turns 2 through 4, or killing your opponents. Especially if your opponent goes first and you're not able to deploy an early blocker, the game can just be over. So knowing that we want lots of cheap plays, especially at the 2-drop slot, you need to prioritize that pick. This cannot be said enough. 2-drops are extremely important for success in draft. Cards like Spirited Companion, the Modern Age, and Virus Beetle are extremely high picks. Now, I'm not as concerned with how my non-creature spells fit into my curve. Their mana costs don't really tell you when they're going to be played. For example, a 2-mana combat trick might be played on turn 8. The only thing I make sure I consider with my non-creature spells is that they all impact the board. Also, you need to be very picky with auras that target your own creatures. They tend to be a liability since you can't cast them at instant speed. A lot of the time, your opponent is just going to kill your creature out from underneath of you. You get a 2-for-1 and they end up way ahead. In Pack 2, we're also likely to get slightly different signals than we received in Pack 1 since a different set of drafters is passing to us this time. Now remember, the same people that passed to us in Pack 1 are going to pass to us again in Pack 3. Completely jumping ship and ditching what you did in Pack 1 is very risky, since if we stick with what we have, we're likely going to get paid off again in Pack 3, although I am still open to reading signals if we need to. For Pack 2, Pick 1, we saw very little green in Pack 1, so I think I'm passing on the Mythic and grabbing this good white enchantment that fits our deck pretty well. Pick 2 is the Mind Link mech because I think we may end up in blue-white. There aren't really any cards in white or blue that are high picks, and Branch of Boseiju is fantastic, so we're going to take it and see if we can get any other good green cards. Another Michiko's Reign of Truth, Pick 4. Another good green card, Pick 5. Another good green card, Pick 6 in Generous Visitor. Tamiyo's Safekeeping, Geothermal Kami, and Wanderer's Intervention. And nothing else really for us as we round out Pack 2. So as I said before, I'm open to reading signals, and in this case, we got paid off with some really strong green cards. Hopefully this continues for us in Pack 3. So one thing worth mentioning here is our mana. If we haven't had a chance to pick up mana fixing for our 2 colors, which we haven't, this is important to prioritize before we end the draft. Being able to consistently cast spells of both of your colors on time is very, very powerful and limited. If we see a green-white dual land in Pack 3, we're definitely going to take it. Now, while we're on the topic of mana, this is also a good time to discuss splashing. A splash is when you play 1 or more cards of a 3rd color in your primarily 2-color deck. A common mistake is to splash too many cards of a 3rd color, leading you to just essentially having a 3-color deck. Another common mistake is to splash for cards that are just not powerful enough to justify it. You take a huge hit in consistency by playing 3 colors, you need to make sure that card is powerful enough to justify that risk. You also want to make sure that the cards you're splashing for are more expensive. You'll have more time to find that splash color, and don't splash for cards with multiple pips of different colors. Having to find 2 different colors of a splash, or 2 blue pips, for example, is not really a risk you want to take. Yugen Defends the Temple is a card I would definitely splash. Although it's not expensive, it only has 1 mana pip and has a massive impact on the game, even if you cast it late. Now, a good rule of thumb for a single splash is 3 mana sources of that color. That could just be 3 basic lands, but that's really not ideal. We want ways to search up lands, maybe artifacts that tap for colors, dual lands. For example, in Kamigawa, I would consider a copy of Greater Tanuki one of those 3 splash sources, since it can search up that 3rd color on its own. If you plan to splash a card, prioritize your mana and make sure you can cast your spells on time. So let's see how the rest of the draft treats us, and then we'll move on to deck building. We pick up the Fall of Lord Konda, Blossom Prancer, Touch the Spirit Realm, Spirited Companion over Season of Renewal, Wanderer's Intervention, and we do manage to grab a green-white dual land. That's nice. We'll take the Kitsune, pick 7. Intercessor's Arrest is nice. Samurai, take another Samurai, nothing for us here, and an Era of Enlightenment to round out the draft. So now for deck building. The minimum amount of cards for a limited deck is 40, and we almost always want to play 40. The reason being, we want to give ourselves the highest chance to draw our best cards. We're also looking to play 23 spells and 17 lands. Almost all limited decks should play 17 lands. There are some exceptions where you'll want to play 16 if your curve tops out at, let's say, 3 or 4 in a really aggressive deck. Some decks, it's even rarer, will play 18. Now don't forget some rules of thumb while we're deck building. Consider how many creatures you're playing, consider your mana curve, and make sure that all of the cards you play impact the board on their own, and that every card in your deck contributes towards the same game plan. This green-white deck we drafted wants to win through enchantment synergies and value from all of our sagas, so any cards that don't point in that direction are probably going to get cut. So we have 42 cards currently, so we just need to cut 2. I believe those 2 cuts are the Kitsune and the Ecologist Terrarium, although I also considered cutting Containment Construct. If you're not sure about the last few cuts in your deck, this is a great time to tap into 17 lands again. I like to use this stat here, which stands for the game in hand win rate. This shows us how many games did players win when this card was in their hand during the game. Another great stat is improvement when drawn. This gives us an idea the impact, or lack thereof, a card will have on the game on average. If you're looking for some additional resources to improve at Limited Magic, I personally listen to the Limited Resources podcast. Twitch streams and draft videos are also a great way to learn. I like to narrate a bit what I would take from a pack and see if it lines up with what they do. If it doesn't, ask yourself why, and see if you can figure out why they took that card instead. For this reason, I really enjoy streamers that explain and narrate their picks and plays as they go. 2 streamers great at this are Numot the Nummy and LSV. You can check them out on Twitch. Links to all of the resources I mentioned are in the description below. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments, and best of luck in your next draft. Thanks for watching.